very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the first place, I would like to congratulate IFTA, their prestigious panelists, and especially IFTA Brazil, and our colleague Goretti for this brilliant and bright initiative. Furthermore, for me, it's an honor that our São Paulo School of Judges, represented by our director here, Professor Cortez, and São Paulo Judges Association supported this very important webinar. Our lecture today will address the relevant topic of COVID-19 and force majeure in transportation law, new challenges from a Brazilian perspective. As a matter of fact, as we are all aware, the pandemic is a global total social fact because all classes and countries suffered its effects from what impose and will impose new challenges, as we have now described about the situation in Africa related with Great Britain that yesterday was decreed. But this is a total social fact as the definition of Marcel Mauss in France. In fact, the consequences have been unparalleled since the Second World War, especially in the light of the effects of globalization with an emphasis on the economic circulation of service. Therefore, air transportation, without doubt, was highly affected with a drop in the flow of passengers and cargo. Therefore, these universal economic effects required an immediate reaction. And what happened? The most speedy reaction came from the airlines because the economic sector is much more dynamic than the legal one, with all respects to our activity. But regarding these, the precautions were an imposition of measures reviewed at tremendous speed. And therefore, there are 45 measures that have been adopted by airlines that are very important. I can emphasize some of them: the use of high efficiency air filters, the direction on the airflow on board, safer filters than in road transportation, UV rays, electrostatic sprayers, the ultraviolet lights, and the robots for disinfection of the cabins, and high efficiency air filters. So the pandemic was a catalyst too for touchless and biometry technology as an irreversible path, an advance that is very relevant. On the other hand, special laws and temporary and extraordinary nature were edited with an emphasis on protecting the sector at a worldwide level, as we are all aware. Nonetheless, here in Brazil, some legal standards presented complicated tones that impose analysis to the interpreter in the light of antinomies and loopholes and normative gaps. Here in Brazil, the exceptional and temporary regime was issued by law through law 14034 for 1220 for 12 months and related with return of the value of the tickets, cancellation, relocation, and refund, as in the US, European Union. But the great problem here, the new challenge, one of the challenges, it described the pandemic as a force majeure immediately, automatically. And this is a great problem for us, because like Professor Antomatei in France has described it, force majeure figures are like labels that must be written on, subject to verification in concrete. It's not an automatic situation that you just describe as in the First World War, the Fayot Law, or an Italian decree that was enacted in 1915. As an example, China is already issuing many force majeure certificates related with transportation that have not been accepted here in Brazil and other common law countries, because it's not automatic. We have to analyze concretely, the concrete analysis that imposes the analysis of the elements of force majeure. And therefore, here in Brazil, we have the model of the Austrian author Adolf Exner about the force majeure Höhere in transportation law. So the event must be extrinsic, is the first element that we shall analyze. Extrinsic to my risk activity. Here we have the strict liability related with transportation, but it shall be extrinsic to my risk activity, the risk allocation, and therefore subcontractation too. The second one is inevitability or unavoidability. The predicability is an index of this unavoidability. Then the event shall be irresistible, insurmountable, uncontrollable, and therefore causing the impossibility to comply or to perform. And this impossibility will, as a matter of fact, reflect for the cessation with you cannot therefore be able to implement this obligation. But this obligation is the obligation of transportation. Is one of the obligations, is the obligation related with the transport contract, but it's not including the lateral duties. We shall analyze the contract as a complex structure, the obligation as a complex structure that is not referred only to transportation or displacement. Therefore, if we have a pandemic, we shall analyze all the structures. Just imagine together, therefore, that we have an embargo as Britain has decreed yesterday, or in the future, we have an embargo from a specific country. What happens there? This is an extrinsic event, inevitable, irresistible, insurmountable, uncontrollable to the airline, the transportation, the travel agent, and therefore the impossibility to comply the displacement, the transportation. But the question is, what is then? It is the complete extinction of the contract, or it remains some other duties. And this is very important. Brazil, in this matter, as in Germany and many other European countries, following the regulation 261 of 2004 of the European Union, there is the obligation to protect. And this obligation to protect is independent, is autonomous. As in German, the Nebenpflichten, Schutzpflichten, we have the obligation to protect the lateral duties, and these lateral duties, they are autonomous. Therefore, if there is an embargo, I am not able to sue the airline or the travel agent related with transportation. That is not more enforceable. It's impossible. It's a force majeure that we have in concrete proved. Nonetheless, it remains these lateral duties, the lateral duties that have originated in the objective good faith that for us is a principle and now a general clause. Therefore, there is the obligation of assistance, there is the obligation of accommodation, there is the obligation to inform, to clarify. And in our system, even with force majeure, if the transport, the carrier does not comply with the duty of assistance, it can be sued not about the transportation that is not more enforceable, but that about the assistance that has not been provided. And therefore, it can be a cause to be sued, and an indemnization related of the assistance that have not been provided, not about the transportation that is not enforceable. This is very interesting, but it's very important to emphasize that this is applying just for passengers' rights. In our system, we have to make this big difference. The transportation of cargo that is very relevant too. We have much more influence from the common law, UNIDROIT principles, the principles of European countries, European common law. That is very important that we have the precautionary principle, the assumption of risk, the doctrine of assumption of risk. And therefore, it's very important that in the contract of transportation, we shall enact previously a force majeure clause, not a REP 1. The REP up that just puts etc. is a great problem for lawyers. Here in Brazil, for instance, in air cargo, if you have a force majeure clause that includes epidemic situation or embargo, the burden of proof is reverted to the other. Nonetheless, if you have a wrap-up clause that is at first very easy to implement, putting an etc., you don't have this reversal, and it is very more complicated for the clients. Therefore, the new challenges that we have in this cargo transportation, there is no obligation to protect. There is the preponderance of private autonomy, the freedom of contract, the force majeure clause, and therefore, to avoid some problems, you shall have previously the assumption of risks. And if you have more difficulties, this is the situation that our colleague Barone, our colleague Cortez, everybody from the judges are facing now the reality. The law in the books is a situation. The law in action is another one. We are aware about this. And what is happening about our this force majeure clause? We are facing much more difficulty to comply, to perform, than impossibility to perform. And therefore, there is the hardship clause that is very important, related. We can imagine the consequence of the Suez Canal, and therefore, not the impossibility for someone, but the difficulty for the others. And if you have a contract related with cargo that has not provided a hardship clause, you have the risk that in Great Britain, the arbitrators will analyze the situation as not as a force majeure. In 1956 and 1967, Nasser blockaded the canal. The canal was blocked due to the situation of nationalization, and the contracts that have not provided the hardship and the force majeure, they have to use from South Africa, the Cape of Hope, another route, even if the costs were increased. Therefore, the very importance of having this related with cargo, having this previously enacted, and with the contracts of freedom of contracts. Therefore, this is the most important one. And arriving for the concluding remarks, we have a challenge now as a total social fact. And the concluding remarks are: the first one, the global solidarity is an imperative. This is not a phrase of mine. This is a phrase of Amartya Sen, a Nobel Prize. Harari, too, about the pandemic, told us the precautionary principle is essential for the future. We must create funds for the next global epidemic. We don't know when it will happen, but there is no question about if. It will happen. We don't know just when. The unknown risk shall be provided in the current situation as a consequence of the human behavior. So we have to change the paradigm. The paradigm is not more an anthropocentric one. We shall change this to a biocentric review, that we are just a part of the total. This is the great challenges. And despite the occurrence, the second concluding remark, of an extraordinary event which could not be avoided, even if the airline company of the travel agent had taken reasonable measures to do so, the non-performance of the contractual relationship, this is very important, given the impossibility of fulfilling the main obligation to transport does not result in distinction of the duty of assistance derived from objective good faith, which requires the cooperation of the parties to achieve the good end of the obligation and has only immediate link with the interests in the provision persisting on the post-contractual phase. Another aspect, the duty to mitigate the loss. The victim is not 100% the consumer. Here, from the common law, we are just applying in our jurisprudence. There are some situations where the consumer is not collaborative, is not implementing the good faith from his part too. So it's a must that he collaborates in a proactive measure, not to be just omitted, not aggravating is not sufficient, a proactive one. So the duty to mitigate the loss is a very important too. Good faith principle applying to the consumer and to the carrier. And finally, the general good faith role, on the other hand, in the air cargo transports, the assumption of risk is doctrine predominates, with a greater density of private autonomy and freedom of contract, imposing at the provincial level the drafting of force majeure and hardship clauses previously. Thank you very much for your attention, and happy Thanksgiving for our American colleagues. Thank you very much indeed.